In this lesson, you'll take a quick review of working with CSS styles in Dreamweaver CS4. Now before we get started, at the beginning of every chapter, you'll want to define a site. And in this particular case, you'd like to define a site using Chapter 2 as your project folder. So you can see down here in the lower right-hand corner in my Files panel, I have Chapter 2 defined. And if you need help doing this, you may need to review the first chapter in which we go over these steps. So you'll see I have an events.html and a products.html document here in my Files panel, as well as an images folder. I'm going to go ahead and double-click on events.html. Now, a few things you may need to do in order to make your screen look like mine. The first thing is click on the design view in order to see your page in design view. And additionally, you're going to want to click on your CSS Styles panel. You may need to go up to Window and choose CSS Styles in order to see this. Now go ahead and click once within that heading, Organic Utopia Events. And here we're going to see something significantly different between Dreamweaver CS4 and prior versions of Dreamweaver. And that's the way the Properties panel is organized. If we look down here within our Properties panel, we can see there's now two sections, HTML and CSS. Go ahead and click on the HTML tab. You can see that when you're in the HTML section of the Properties Inspector, you're solely seeing the HTML attributes. That means there's no styling whatsoever. We don't see color, and we don't see font family, for example. In order to see and change that information, we would need to click on the CSS tab. Go ahead and do that, and you can see that the targeted rule is now H1, which is, of course, heading 1. And here we can change the font, the size, and the color. So this is a significant difference. Dreamweaver CS4 is specifically splitting up HTML and CSS properties, which is exactly right. It's the way it should be done. Now let's go ahead and take this a little further. Leaving your cursor where it is, I'd like you to go over to the CSS Styles panel. And you'll see there's also two tabs here, one labeled All and one labeled Current. Now go ahead and click on the Current tab if you aren't already, and you can see that there's a summary for the pre-existing selection. So in other words, I can see that the CSS rules for this particular selection involves font family as well as color. Now go ahead and click on the All tab here. And when you do this, you're going to see all rules within your document. So here I can see that there's an H1, a P or a paragraph, and a UL or an unordered list. So the paragraph would be here, for example, if I click within that first paragraph. And of course the unordered list would be here. Now just briefly, I'd like you to go ahead and jump into Code View. You can do that by looking in the upper left-hand corner of your HTML document and clicking on Code. And let's go ahead and scroll up a little bit. And here we can see between lines 6 and 22 the style element, which contains those three CSS rules that I just showed you in the CSS Styles panel. So it's important to remember that HTML and CSS can be viewed and edited in Code View, as well as using Dreamweaver's interface. This is something that we're going to be doing quite a bit within these lessons, so it's an important step to remember. Let's go ahead and click back on the design view. And again, let's look at a little bit of review here. If I wanted to modify or change the properties of this H1, there's a few ways I could do this. The first is I could double-click on that H1 rule located here. Go ahead and do that now. And you'll see the CSS rule definition window for H1 up here. Here I could go ahead and modify some of the values for the properties I have selected, such as the color or the font family. But for now, go ahead and click Cancel, because what I'd like to show you is the CSS Styles panel. Now this is something that sometimes gets a little bit lost. Much of this has to do with the screen real estate. You can see that the properties for H1 are located here within my panel. However, it's a little hard to see. So again, what I'm going to do here is minimize my Files panel by double-clicking it. And what this does is it gives me more room to work with. So what we're seeing here is that we could actually modify our H1 rule, or our heading 1 rule, without having to double-click on it. In other words, if it's selected, I can see the properties here, such as color and font family. Let me do that with paragraph. Here I can see the color is gray, or hexadecimal color 666, and the font size is 14 pixels. If I wanted to change those values, I could click within them, such as I've done here, And I could change the font size from 14 to 16, for example. Press return, and we could see all of our paragraphs enlarged slightly. So this is just a quick review of working with CSS styles in Dreamweaver CS4. In the upcoming lessons, we'll look at this a little bit more, and we'll begin to actually create some new styles.